Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 45 of Daffy's Roundtable. My guest for this episode is Connor of Westgate Exotics, and we're going to talk about inverts, or bugs, or creepy crawlies, or whatever you want to call them. Join us to learn all about jumping spiders, and millipedes, and centipedes, and isopods, and all other kinds of awesome inverts. I've actually been lucky enough to have the chance to meet Connor at several expos now, and his booth is always one of the first places I make a stop at because he always has the coolest things to show me. And he did exactly that during this episode, so I'm super excited for you all to hear this. Also, this episode is going to be released February 25th, meaning the Reptile Expo and the first Plant Expo is tomorrow, Sunday, February 26th, at the International Center in Mississauga. If you're in the area and if you're able to come join us, come hang out. These expos are always so much fun. Come check out some cool animals, come say what's up, and maybe buy some isopods or fossils from Westgate Exotics. But yeah, the expo is tomorrow, February 26th, at the International Center in Mississauga. If you're in the area, come down. It's going to be a lot of fun. Before we get into this conversation, allow me to, as always, thank Exo Terra for sponsoring this podcast and making this episode possible. Exo Terra makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. Okay, let's get into this week's conversation with Connor of Westgate Exotics. Connor, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you? Thank you very much for coming on.
Of course, man, of course. I'm good. I'm glad to be on. I haven't really done this kind of stuff. Video format is not something I normally do. I'm getting into it a little bit on Instagram, but very limited in Reels and that sort of thing.
Before we get into anything, I have a funny question for you. What do you call the things you keep?
What do I call the things I keep?
Yeah.
I always refer to them as bugs.
You do call them bugs?
I call them bugs, yeah.
Okay.
I keep arachnids, I keep insects, I keep myriapods, isopods, all sorts of feeders. So bugs is, yeah.
The kind of all terms. I was wondering before the episode, I was like, is it like insulting to call them bugs? Or is there like a more appropriate term for
Maybe,
them? But
I don't know.
No, bugs is good. Bugs is it's funny because people are always like, oh, I'm so scared of bugs. So it's like, anyway, enough of that. The bug talk. Let's actually get into the bug talk. Connor, how did you get started in the hobby? How did you first start keeping?
I probably when I was 13, 14, I wanted a reptile. I was actually supposed to get a tarantula, but my dad lived in Toronto at the time, and we weren't able to get one in Toronto because different bylaws. So I ended up getting a bearded dragon, and then not long after, a boa constrictor.
Nice.
And that was when I was like 14. And then eventually a friend of mine had another bearded dragon that was a male. Mine was a female. So he couldn't keep it anymore. So I kept it. I looked into breeding it. I bred her twice, had some babies, like most reptile people, either a leopard gecko or a bearded dragon, bred them, had babies, gave them to some people, sold them to some people, and ultimately really liked that, really enjoyed keeping them, breeding them, and selling them. So my whole thing has always been as a seller, not just a keeper. So as you can see by my setups, they're not meant to be beautiful. They're meant to be functional.
Right. Breeding setups.
Yeah. I keep it simple. When I kept a lot of reptiles, I used to get all the products, all the plants, everything. And with bugs, I found it more got in the way than anything else. So I keep mine very simple. I have a couple that are set up nice. And if you want to keep something nice, you can, but for breeding purposes, it's more for you than for them. Whereas some reptiles, it's more for them than for you, especially 100%. Dart frog, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like a display with dart frogs, it's more for them. But sometimes, like if you set up a nice bugarium or whatever, it'd be a nice display for the house. But cool. So when did you transition from reptiles to bugs?
Not that long ago. So that was the beginning. And then when I was a late teen, I moved to BC, I had maybe 5 or 6 reptiles before I left. I kept 1 or 2 with a friend, and then I gave or sold the other ones. And then tried some things out there. And then there was an internship open at Reptilia back in Ontario. So
Nice.
I came back. I planned on doing it for a couple months while working somewhere else. And then the guy who ran the store said, "Hey, when you volunteer out here, you actually work. Do you want to work in the store?" So I ended up stopping the internship just to work in the store. So
Nice.
I was working at Reptilia, and then as people left, I was the senior staff member. I worked there, I think, for 3 or 4 years. So I just became the guy who ordered everything. So I would order all the Zoom Ed stock, the Exo Terra stock, the Rapashi stock, that kind of stuff. So started working there, started getting more and more reptiles. As I had access to like import lists, stuff like that, I really was in love with geckos. And I had probably 40 species groups, like 40 different species of geckos. Like I was just geckos. But I was finding that every single day I was misting them. I was feeding Rapashi. I was feeding different insects. I had ones that like it cool. I had ones that like it warm. UV lights, not UV lights, calcium, egg laying that stick to the glass, some that need it underground, some that just lay it on the sand. So it became more work than it was fun. So
Right.
after a bit, I dissolved that, and then I had a couple inverts that I was still like feeders and stuff that I was still keeping going. A couple geckos and tortoises. I still have my tortoises that that I was keeping going, and I was trying to figure out what can I do that I enjoy it and I can breed it as like a side project, and it's not taking all my time. And I thought about snakes. I thought about different things, but I ended up getting a tarantula for my girlfriend, Alicia at Terra, and I was trying to get a male P Metallica because she bought a P Metallica almost 8 years ago, and it was an adult. This is like 3 years ago, and I was like, well, maybe I'll get her a tarantula. That would be cool. And then I was like, maybe I'll get her a male. Maybe I could breed tarantulas. And I didn't know 4 years ago. I knew the basics, but I didn't know that much about breeding them. So I just started watching all these things, just kind of in secret because I wanted the tarantula to be a surprise. And I just realized that it was cool. And it was from Tarantula Canada. And they also had isopods on their list. And this was 3 years ago. So they had 2 armadillidium species that I was kind of interested in. And when I got the armadillidium, I got the tarantula. It was really cool. I liked it. I started getting more tarantulas, but what really got me going was the isopods. They were breeding every week. They seemed really easy care. So I got a few more and I got a few more, and then I started importing them because I was trying to figure out, well, how can I get more? So I was talking to people in Europe and got hooked up with different importers, including Northern Lights Imports, Ashley Dezan. So I was getting isopods through then, and then I realized, especially during COVID, that a lot of places were having a hard time getting inverts, and then a lot of the people that had inverts, it was tarantulas, some isopods, and that was really it. Some scorpions. So I started looking into, because when I had geckos, I was really into the oddball, the weird geckos. I had a lot of the Madagascar geckos that you don't see very often. I had a lot of the Australian geckos that you don't see very often. And so I was just trying to figure out what cool stuff can I get? And Canada, you're allowed to have any, Ontario at least, you're allowed to have any reptile. It's just all bylaws. So like in Ontario, you can have any reptile, but maybe in Toronto, you can only have these. Maybe in some small town, you can have anything.
In Ottawa, you can't have anything.
Yeah. In Ottawa, is that right?
The bylaw, it's not exactly anything, but the bylaws are horrible down here.
I know I've sold to a pet store there. I'm like, well, I can sell you vinegaroons and whip scorpions, right? They're like, not even that.
Not even
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
So,
It's I think 3
isopods are safe.
isopods were good. 3 species of tarantulas are legal, and that's it, I believe.
Yeah.
And 1 species of mantis, maybe something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So so yeah, I was learning more and more, and our inverts in Canada are governed by the CFIA, which is Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and their primary goal is not, hey, what does the hobby like? What's safe, not safe, what's endangered, what's not endangered. They're purely worried about what's going to eat our crops, what's going to destroy our environment. Like they really are worried about pests. And the way that they govern is if it eats plants in general and it's an insect, it's not allowed. So arachnids are allowed, centipedes are allowed, native species are allowed, and that also depends a little bit province to province. But like here, we can't have stick bugs, we can't have beetles, we can't have exotic ants, anything that's an insect that eats plants. We can't really have, and millipedes we can't really have either. And the primary reason is because they're worried that it's going to be a problem for our crops. It's going to be a problem in BC. It's going to be a problem in the areas in Ontario where we grow a lot of fruits and veg. So I worked around that, figured out stuff that's really interesting, started importing, and I think people really liked the stuff I was importing because more and more stores started reaching out. I did more shows. I kept selling out of stuff. So I just kept bringing stuff in. I try and do at least 75% captive bred. So
That is really, really cool. Okay, so couple of follow-up questions there. You said beetles aren't allowed. Is that Ontario wide, or is that just your bylaw in your
this
area?
is all nationwide. This is all nationwide CFIA. We can have native beetles. We can have native millipedes. We can have native stick bugs. We can have native grasshoppers. And then sometimes species that are already here and have been here a long time, we're allowed to keep. So certain snails we're allowed to have, certain snails we're not allowed to have. But the beetles that everyone likes in Europe and Japan, where they're the most popular, are not allowed here.
Interesting.
So large beetles, like stag beetles, rhinoceros beetles, fruit beetles. If it's not native here, then we can't legally keep it. So,
but there are some native ones.
There are some native ones. Yeah, we have native stag beetles. We have at least 3 in Ontario. I think 4. They're all small. We very rarely have Lucanus elaphus show up in far south Ontario, like around Windsor, and they're actually a proper stag beetle. They really have horns. And then we have a couple fruit beetles that are actually pretty. We have a couple fruit beetles that are actually green or blue. And then we have the invasive Japanese beetle, but I don't think anyone keeps them, and I'm not sure if we're legally able to keep them because they are an invasive species. Okay. They're one of the few that actually is. And they didn't come here from the pet trade. They came here because of from crops, from just international trade.
Okay, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. What do you think of all these, or of the CFIA's way of putting out these laws, or like the protections? Do you think it makes sense?
It makes sense in the sense that they want to keep stuff safe, but it doesn't make sense in the sense that it's a blanket ban.
Right.
It's like banning all medication. It does like there's some stuff that's not safe. There's some stuff that is, and banning it all. If inverts were governed by a different body, like Ministry of Natural Resources or something like that, we might see some more. There's also people working very hard, like Zach at Canada Ant Colony, and there's another guy in BC that's working hard to get things legal. You can submit paperwork to the CFIA, and they primarily want to see studies that show that they're not a problem. And recently, we've got discoids legalized, which we never had a feeder roach legal. Depending on which CFIA agent you ask, Suriname roaches are legal, but they're not a very good feeder. Discoids are a very good feeder. So, like, even in Canada, like U.S. keepers, they have dubia roaches. They're not a problem. They don't get out. They're not invading homes or eating crops. But here, because there's a blanket ban, we don't even have dubia roaches. But discoid roaches, luckily, are a good fit, and I have some right here that I'm breeding up. They came from Zach. They're legal stock, so I'm excited to get those in the market more, because a lot of people don't know that yet. It's not like there's big bulletins that go out saying, hey, these are now legal, and I think even feeder companies don't really know the status yet.
I don't think so either. Will you have some available at the next expo?
Yes, I will.
Okay,
Yep,
save me some.
I will. I will. I will.
Cool. Okay, so wait, so I'm just gonna touch on that real quick as well. You said Surinams aren't as good a feeder as a discoid roach. In what terms?
Well, they can climb for one.
Okay.
They're small for another. They're parthenogenetic, which means they're all female and they clone themselves. So if one gets out and lives in your tank, you're going to have a bunch. They're not a house problem, but they are a greenhouse problem, which means that they could eat your plant's roots. They could eat your plant's leaves if left unchecked. So like tanks like yours in the background there, they could be a problem. If fed one by one, crushed head like I do with inverts, they're not a problem. Now that I have discoid roaches, I don't really anyway. And then I also have fed bred mealworms, superworms. For picky eaters, I'll still pick up crickets here and there for certain jumping spiders and stuff like that. But I breed, besides a very small fraction of my imports, everything behind me I feed fully from stuff I breed. I don't buy feeders ever. It's partly a cross-contamination thing. It's partly a cost-effective thing. It's partly just because I like offer, like if you see my lists ever, I have a lot of feeders on the list. I'm constantly breeding fruit flies, bean beetles, mealworms, everything I can breed. I was even looking into aquatic stuff. I actually, before I ever met you, I saw your video breeding dwarf crayfish because I
Yeah.
wanted to get in some more aquatic stuff. And I decided until I move, I'm not going to set up a bunch of aquariums here, but I really want to get into Geosarma crabs and different dwarf crayfish. I think that those are an interesting part of the market.
Which crabs?
Geosarma. They're a fully freshwater crab. They're really beautiful. They come in all different colors. I'll send you a link later.
Yeah, please do.
And they're fully freshwater. So most crabs, if they're freshwater or terrestrial, they still need the ocean to breed. These guys are fully freshwater. They have their babies directly egg to crab lit. They don't have a larva stage.
Okay, cool.
And they just breed in the tank. There's ones with red eyes. There's one with red carapace, purple. They're all these colors. They're about this big. They're perfect size. They can't climb glass. They are omnivores, room temperature. They're really just like, they're an easy crab, because a lot of crabs that come in, hermit crabs, fiddler crabs, all these crabs they're 100% from the wild. Tons of them die when they come here. And they're not very sustainable. And they tend not to live very long in captivity because they're not truly terrestrial crabs. They're terrestrial crabs with a pelagic, a marine stage.
Okay, so another thing you mentioned as we were speaking is that you started importing the cooler or the rare isopods.
Yeah.
What was the process of figuring out that, oh, I can import, and sort of how did you source these isopods that were outside of Canada?
I talked to other breeders. I saw what they did to import them, and then I talked for stuff that's for arachnids, for tarantulas, jumping spiders. I'll import them myself a lot from the US or wherever. I have a guy who does a service for driving stuff across the border with paperwork and everything for the US, and then of course Ashley from Northern Lights helps me with Europe. And I work, because I do large volumes, I work with her to figure out a way to make it so I can still sell them. With isopods, I don't import to sell. I import to breed fully. With all the other stuff, arachnids, centipedes, that's mostly just what I can import is arachnids, centipedes. I have imported some millipedes. It was a process. I had help with Zach from Canada Ant Colony with that. But most arachnids and centipedes from Europe came from Ashley, and then from the States I either do it myself or use the drive across program. And then isopods I always used somebody who's experienced, because they know how to do the paperwork, because isopods are kind of a new thing in Canada, whereas arachnids are pretty much, they go straight across. I can talk more in depth about it.
No, that's good. That's that's exactly what I'm sort of asking. From what you just said and from speaking to you at expos, you do a lot of, or it seems that you do a lot of imports for stocks or just to resell.
Yeah. So isopods I breed fully myself. Some tarantulas and arachnids I bring in to breed myself. Like a lot of jumping spiders, I breed myself. My
Okay.
jumping spider is about 60-40 import versus bred myself. And then a lot of my jumping spiders are captive bred. And then there's some stuff that doesn't really come in captive bred very often. So my Phrynis from Florida, which are a whip scorpion,
Right.
they come in wild caught. And then my Mastigoproctus come in from Texas. They're also wild caught. I have bred both with less success with the Mastigoproctus. They're right here. The star means she's gravid. So they're a whole process to breed, which is why they're not often bred. They molt over the winter. They live in Arizona, Texas, where it's warm, it's hot, but there's still a cold winter. So they live throughout all year. They go breed in the fall. The female will go under a rock, dig a big hole, and over the winter she molts and then has an egg pouch. And she just kind of sits all winter under there with her egg pouch. And then early spring, the babies hatch, go on her back, and then she emerges from the burrow. So to replicate that in captivity, it's lowering the temperatures, not super low, but like 15 degrees Celsius. Okay. Having a deep area that they can go in, make sure it's not too wet, not too cold, and you only get one shot at it. So mine laid eggs. I paired two. One laid eggs, one molted without laying eggs, and everything was going good. Her burrow collapsed. She came out and she ripped her egg sac on her water dish. Wow. So they just didn't end up hatching, but they were fertile. Like everything was going well. So I have to wait a whole other year to try it again.
And so wait, hold on. So what did you call them? What are these called?
Mastigoproctus. Sorry, vinegaroons.
Okay, so these are the okay. That's what I thought. I thought it was. I was just okay.
Yeah.
And so the adult pair are fine.
Yeah. So they
so it's just
yeah. There's a lot of misinformation about them. A lot of people say they live 3 years. They live well over 5 years, because they have such a slow breeding process. They only have babies once a year, and I think it's like 20 to 40 babies is normal. I've thought about getting into the Asian species. They're just not as big, and they're a little more flighty. These guys are very big and slow because the Asian species are not dependent on a breeding cycle. You just pair them anytime. They breed anytime.
Do they look the same?
They look the same. They're just smaller, slightly different. But if you saw a young one of both, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. They all look very, very similar. Like I said, most people import tarantulas because there's a big tarantula market. And increasingly in the last few years, as they became legal, and I'm not sure who got it done or the process, but it must have been less than 10 years ago, maybe 5 or 7 years ago. Isopods, exotic isopod species became legal to import into Canada. And before that, it was just whatever was here you were able to legally keep. And I did keep some species that were around, Porcellio scaber and stuff like that. And on a side tangent, we have very few native isopods. Most of the isopods that we have around Ottawa, around Toronto, these are isopods that came over like 50 to 150 years ago from Europe, like Porcellio scaber and Armadillidium vulgare, the roll-up ones and the flat ones that are kind of rough looking. Yeah. Those are both from Europe. They both came in plants like in the 1800s and the 1900s. Like they're not native here. There's like 6 or 7 common species you find, and not one of them is native to Ontario. We have a couple very small native species, but for the most part, the isopods you see outside are ones that came from Europe. And I shouldn't say they're invasive, they're introduced. And the real difference there is it causing a problem in the environment, or is it just coexisting with the existing environment? Kind of like earthworms. Earthworms also came from Europe around 100, 200 years ago. They're so prolific, you can go to the middle of a national park, dig in the earth and find earthworms. And as far as we can tell, they haven't destroyed our ecosystem, where we had no earthworms in Ontario prior to Europeans coming here. But as far as stuff I want to try and import, I try and import centipedes. They don't sell super well, but I know how to keep them well so that I can kind of bring in 10 sell them over the course of the year because it's hard to find non-wild caught centipedes. Like I try and bring in not just the Asian wild caught stuff. Like I've got captive bred. You saw the rainbow colored ones. Captive bred Malaysian jewels, captive bred, or at least farm bred Galapagoensis and Giganteus, like interesting species. And then the Masticoproctus, which are the vinegaroons. I try and bring in whip scorpions. Jumping spiders are huge right now. So
they are.
They're. I get more
So
messages.
popular.
I get more messages for jumping spiders than everything else combined. Yeah. And I've got some captive bred ones right now. I've got some captive bred Regius, some captive bred Hylas diardi. But I bring in farm bred ones, I bring in captive bred ones, and I bring in wild caught ones.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I try, like I said, I try and do every number. Like if each individual animal is an individual animal, I try and do at least 75% captive bred.
Right. So does that mean you're breeding the centipedes as well?
Trying to.
Yeah.
Not easy. I've bred 3 species with varying success. And you can see here, we got a mature male running around. Okay. He's coming to say hi. Yeah. So I've been growing up some Galapagoensis. They're matrophagus, which means that they only have one set of babies in their life. And just like velvet spiders, the babies eat the mother as part of the life cycle. Wow. And they get about this big before they're ready to breed. They come from the dry areas of Peru. So it's a whole process. I've had better success with flagtail centipedes. I got eggs. I got babies. I raised the babies a bit. I gave some to another person. Some of them made it. Some of them didn't. And then I've had Scolopendra viridis, which are not a communal centipede, but I've been keeping them communally by feeding them a lot of pre-killed prey. And I've had babies of them as well. So I'm working on it. The species I really like, besides the source countries where they farm them, where they collect wild ones, put them in bins, and then they breed naturally, very few people have bred them. Some people in Asia have. I'm working on breeding. I want to breed my Scolopendra hardwickii, which people who know centipedes, those are like the holy grail centipedes. Those are the ones that are bright orange, bright black, bright orange, bright black.
What's the second name? Sorry,
hardwickii. Hardwick and then EI. Yeah, they're really cool. I don't know how well. We can try.
Oh wow, that's beautiful. Hold on, I think I can even. Oh, okay, yeah.
See that? So I've got 3.
Let me try this.
Oh. And these are like the holy grail centipede, these guys. But I have Galapagoensis, I have white legs, I have Gigantea, I have Malaysian jewels, I have cherry reds, and yeah, those guys. These ones, I think the dark red, I'm pretty sure they come from Sri Lanka. I'd love to have the dark red like that. But yeah, these guys were bred in Asia and then sent to a wholesaler in the US who is passionate about centipedes as well. And then I got them from him. I brought some in to sell. It's a hard sell. 900.
Right, because they're... Sorry, say that again? 900
Canadian.
Okay,
one.
Yeah. And they're supposedly pretty venomous?
They're no recorded deaths. For centipedes, the only recorded deaths are South American species, and I think a couple Asian species that are large where it bit children in the face. So they have a bad habit of going into bottles, pop cans, stuff like that to hide, and kids will pick up a bottle and then they'll get bit in the face. So the only people who've ever died from centipede bites have been kids getting bit in the face, and it's luckily fairly rare. They're not like some scorpions or some spiders where they can be quite venomous, and their venom is primarily, there's some variation among species. They're from all over the world, but they're all one genus. The big centipedes are all Scolopendra. They're mostly histamine, so it's a lot of swelling, it's a lot of pain, it's a lot of but they tend not to be necrotic venom. They tend not to be blood clotting or blood thinning venom. with the exception of Scolopendra hainananum from Hainan, China, I believe, which are, if you get bit on the finger with one of those, your finger's coming off. It's gonna be necrotic.
Right.
So are they venomous? Yeah, it's gonna be pain, but it's not gonna be anything beyond that. Similar to like bad tarantula bites, like the medically significant tarantulas from India and Africa are bad. But if you're a healthy adult, it's gonna be pain and not much more. You don't have to worry about cardiac or blood or neurological or necrotic things from them.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, not so cool, but cool.
You're not gonna die.
Yeah. So okay, so on the topic of importing, we spoke at one of the expos, and you told me about importing the emperor scorpions.
Yeah. So getting paperwork, getting an importer, it's hard to get paperwork from a source. It's easy to get paperwork from a source country. It's hard to get paperwork from a source country and then ship to another country. So a company in the States brought them in, and I'm not a big CITES guy. I usually get other people to help me with it, but a company brought them in, and I asked them, "Hey, can I get some?" They said, "No, we don't have paperwork to send to Canada." I talked to a friend in the States who had some import papers, because everything with CITES, it's Convention on International Trade of Exotic Species. As far as I understand it, and I don't understand it super well, is there's CITES 1, CITES 2, CITES 3. CITES 3, there is you're allowed to import fairly freely. You have to record numbers coming out of a source country going between countries. CITES 2 is a little more rigorous, where there's hard caps on amounts coming from the wild, and it can be harder to get paperwork from them. And then CITES 1 is, unless you're a zoo or a lab, you can't really get the paperwork on them. So luckily, emperors are CITES 3. They're not that hard to get paperwork on. So I just found a guy who had, because for every country, I think there's like 500 a year, something. It's a yearly amount is allowed to go either between countries or from a source country, and he had some numbers, so I brought in 40 of them.
Right, and
from the States.
And you were telling me how they were bred.
Yeah, so
could you tell us about that, please?
yeah, now that they're being bred, because you can't just take, you can take some from the wild, but I think there's a zero export on wild caught emperors. I'm sure they still go into Europe. I'm sure they still go into Japan sometimes. But what they do now is they get wild caught ones and they put them in these big pits. And they do the same thing with Asian forest scorpions. I don't think as successfully as emperor scorpions, but because they do the same thing in South America with these giant centipedes. So and a lot of tarantulas. A lot of these countries now, it's in the last 10 years, they'll set up in a place where these animals are from, take animals from the wild, put them in a enclosed area, and breed them. Just let them breed. And so it's kind of like passive farming. So they do the same thing with emperor scorpions, but because they're fairly communal, they'll have these giant pits of emperor scorpions. And they used to do it, I think, to collect them. So like I know a person at Reptilia said when they went to Africa, they would go around these pits and there would just be hundreds of them. And you can see videos of different scorpion farms where they just have scorpions on top of scorpions on top of scorpions, because a lot of these communal scorpions really won't bother each other. You can just chuck crickets in, and they'll just kind of breed. They just kind of breed like crazy. And so with the emperor scorpions, it's a pit in the ground with a bunch of like terracotta pots, stuff like that for them to hide in. And they just have tons of them. And I think they pull out gravid females, or they pull out females with babies on their backs. It's neat. I'd love to see it. I've seen videos. I haven't seen it in person. I've never been to Africa, but and like I said, I know they're doing it with centipedes in Asia as well, supposedly, and Asian forest scorpions supposedly for Chinese traditional medicine. So there's a real market for them, not just as a pet or an oddity.
Okay.
But as far as I know, those haven't been successful yet. And then you also see scorpion venom farms, where the venom, people heard that the venom is very valuable by weight because it is for scientists. But what they don't realize is that when they set up these giant farms is that the demand for the venom is not very high. So a lot of people set up these venom farms in different places, including Iran and stuff, seeing the money side of it, and then didn't have anywhere to sell the scorpions. And then I know in China they have different species for different reasons, medical reasons, traditional Chinese medicine, that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Do you breed any scorpions yourself at home?
Yeah, I kept some of my emperors, and I've also been collecting emperor. Like anytime an emperor comes up, I buy it, and so I've gotten pretty
Why
good
is that?
because they're hard to get. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get more.
Yes.
I can bring in Pandanus viatoris whenever because they're not CITES. So I brought
what is
in.
that?
It's a closely related species. They look the same.
Okay.
They're a little less friendly, and their claws are a little less round. So they're just like the tiniest bit. Not as it's like two different dart frog morphs where they look very close, but everyone wants one and not the other. You know what I mean?
Right.
Where like there's two different tinks, and one's really $500 and one's $40. It's just this one is the coveted one. Do you want to see
the
one?
rarer one? Sure, 100%.
I kept the biggest one.
Of course. You keep a pair?
I've got 7.
Wow.
I've got 7 of the 40. I think this is the biggest one.
Are you gonna put them all in a big breeding pit?
Yeah, because they're so valuable, I'm afraid to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want, because they are communal, but there's always a chance.
Have you paired any? Hold on, let me do that.
I have paired some.
Here.
The other problem with Asian forest and emperor scorpions is that they are absolutely like metabolic rocks. Like you can pair them, and 18 months later you might get babies. You know what I mean?
I heard that scorpions have like a sperm retention for like 3-4 years or something like that.
I believe so. And then even when they just get gravid, even if they think, hey, it's time to have babies, depending on the temperature, amount of food, I've heard 12 months, I've heard 18 months. A lot of people will buy wild-caught Asian forest scorpions and 2 years later get babies. And they're like, it must be parthenogenesis. It must be females. But no, they, like you said, they can store sperm, but also just their natural gestation can take a really long time. And they're good moms. They keep the babies on their back. They break off food. They give it to them. They really do a lot of parental care. It's really neat.
Is there a point? Sorry?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, is there a point where it goes from good parental care to aggression?
I'm sure it is, but the babies tend to leave the mom's back on their own, and then they'll kind of do their own thing. And even in a couple species, babies will actually not do well unless they're with other babies. Like Pandanus dictator, I've heard from people that if you separate off the babies, they just don't eat. They like to be together, live in groups, just naturally. So that's kind of interesting. Emperor scorpions, I've raised little tiny ones from other people's breedings separately. They seem to do fine on their own. I've got a one-clawed one over here. Just a little
one-clawed one?
Yeah, I got him less expensive because he's only got one claw, and supposedly they're able to grow him back. But he's molted a couple times for me. I got him when he was teeny tiny. And
oh yeah, I see him.
Sorry, I'm not used to cameras.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see. He's just got a little nub of a claw, and I don't know if it's going to grow back any more than that. But he eats fine. Mating him will be a problem because the way scorpions mate is
it is a him.
I'm not sure. I'm pretty good at sexing them when they're bigger, when they're small.
Mm-hmm.
The way you sex most scorpions, is they have these things right. If I'm a scorpion, they have these things right here called pectines, and they look like a comb. They have fingers on them. Males will be quite large and have long combs. Females will be shorter and smaller.
Okay.
And So with larger specimens side by side, you can tell the difference. With small ones, it's too hard for me to tell.
There's nothing to compare it to.
But they use those to pick up. So a male will drop a sperm plug and it will stick to something, and they'll use their claws to pull a female over it. So if he's a male, he might have a hard time pulling a female over if he's only got one arm. So we'll see down the road.
Okay.
And yeah.
And that's an emperor as well, right?
Emperor as well, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Right now I have emperors, and then I also have a few Gigantometrus swammerdami, which are the largest scorpions in the world. I'm just letting them be right now. And then I have some flat rock scorpions, which are very hard to get now. And they're hard to breed. I have some captive bred ones, and then I have one that I don't know if it's captive bred. It was just somebody's pet for years and years. They're the longest scorpion in the world, but they have this long, skinny tail, and they're extremely flat. And they live in extremely dry, rocky areas. Like I missed mine once a month, maybe, and just keep it dry. They eat maybe once a month, maybe less. But they are very flat, very weird looking, and their stinger is almost vestigial. It doesn't even they don't use it. They have almost no venom to speak of. Same with emperors. Their venom's very mild, and they usually don't sting. The Gigantometrus swammerdami, he'll sting you. I'm trying to get some more of them because they're not CITES, and they're bigger than emperors, and they're really cool looking. And the recent findings have found that they don't just live in India, because India, like Australia, has a zero export. You know how Australia won't export any reptiles legally. India won't export any of their wildlife legally, as far as I know,
including bugs.
But they found that this Gigantometrus ranges out into Malaysia, Burma, different places close to India. So there should be a good chance that I can source some, and then I'll have to figure it out
from somewhere else.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Show up. People are breeding them, but they're definitely few and far between. And I think people would really be into them. They're cool. They're a little nastier than emperors, but they can get bigger. They're around the same size, and they're more brown. They're less black, and they're more brown. I think they're interesting. I think they're cool.
Switching back to centipedes, I know I keep jumping between centipedes and scorpions, but there's just so many questions in different places. I'm a bit of a mess today, but I've heard that there is some kind of disease or condition that causes them to behave a little off, and then they just start to die.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's been proven, but this is generally what people have been saying, is that they get... I'm trying to remember the name of it. I talk about it all the time. It's a fungal infection. Mycosis? I believe it's mycosis. It's a fungal infection where when they molt, or when they're in a really moist environment, they get a fungal or bacterial infection where it starts to eat away at their legs and messes with them. And I'm going to try and shift this gently. But how I keep all my... So young ones, it doesn't seem to be as much as a problem. See these tanks here? Yeah. These are where I keep my large centipedes. It's hard to tell, but in the back, I have a hide, that black thing right there.
Yeah.
And under that is sphagnum that's moist. The rest of this tank is dry. And so in here I have Galapagoensis, and I also have white legs, which are either an undescribed species or a subspecies of Galapagoensis, or a locale of Giganteus, depending on who you ask. I think they're an unnamed species, or they're a form of Giganteus. But how I keep these, this is just because the tabs are broken up. I use tanks, so I stuff the paper towel in there. These are just Zilla 20 gallons. So bone dry, and then a really moist corner, and then they can freely go between it, and then a water dish. I find I've kept Asian species that way, tropical Asian species. I've kept high humidity species, including Malaysian jewels, that way. I've never had a mycosis problem. What I see a lot when people have trouble with it, they're keeping them in bins like this with low ventilation. And so they can't get away from the humidity. These are also South American species from areas that are dry. You think of South America, you think Amazon.
Wet. Yeah.
But where these guys live, where the big centipedes live, it's grassland, or it's like dry hills, or it's dry coastal forest. It's fairly dry.
Okay.
But like I said, even with the Asian ones, as long as you keep a spot really moist and give them a water dish and then keep the rest fairly dry, they seem to do really well. So that would be my advice to anyone. And then when they're small, I try and keep it half dry, half wet and give them some ventilation. It's hard because they can sneak through anything. But I find that when they're little, the biggest problem is drying out. When they're big, the biggest problem is being too wet. So it's kind of like finding that balance. And once they get around this big is when I'd shift them to something where it's mostly drier. Because I've had little guys dry out, and I've heard of big guys get those problems, but I've been lucky that it hasn't happened. I think it's because of how I keep them. So fully vented top, and then I use a lock on the doors so they can't get out.
Yeah. Right. So what do they do all day? Are they burrowers? Or do they just kind of hang out? Or they always seem like they're on the move?
9 times out of 10, if I lift up that hide, that's where they're going to be.
In the humid hide?
In the humid hide. 9 times out of 10. They come out during the day. I used to only feed them in a dish because I didn't want their discoid roach going everywhere. Okay. And it got to the point where when they were hungry, they'd come out and hang out by the dish. Okay. And you'll see the same thing with wolf spiders as well, where they learn where food is and they start to like go there, which is kind of interesting for an invert to associate an area with food and hey, I'm hungry, I should go here to get food. But I'm sure that like that's how everything eats, but it's just funny to see it on a macro scale like that. So
it's almost like when you're target training your snakes or something.
Yeah,
it's like you're associating a behavior with a reward.
Yeah, kind of, almost, yeah. So it's interesting that something so primitive in our mind can figure out something like that. And the wolf spiders I've seen, people will have I've seen videos of it where they'll have like a row of termites just outdoors, and they'll take video because they're doing stuff with the termites. And the wolf spider comes out every day, and then they kill the termites, and then the wolf spider's still there. He comes out every night, waits for where the termites are supposed to be, but they're not there anymore. And then after a couple of days, gives up. It's funny that he spends all night. He's like, they're gonna be here. Yeah. It's not like I'm just wandering here. It's like I know that if I come here, there's gonna be food here. And they do the same thing. And then I stopped doing it, and they stopped doing it. I stopped for a few weeks, and because I just started feeding them directly. It was just easier than dropping it in the bowl at that point. But yeah, it's funny. It was an interesting.
Yeah, I'm almost imagining the wolf spider telling all his wolf spider buddies, like, "Come on, I know where there's a spot."
I know where there's a spot.
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's really cool. Okay, another thing you mentioned earlier is the popularity now of jumping spiders.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: jumping spider as pets, jumping spiders versus tarantulas.
Very different. For one, okay. Jumping spiders are small, very visual. You can handle them often. They don't really bite. I've never really seen it, but they live a very short life. They live a very, very short life, and they are sensitive to food and water. Tarantulas, it couldn't be more of the opposite. They live, if it's a female, 10, 20, 30 years. So they live a crazy amount. There's some dwarf species, but they tend to get quite large. New worlds will kick hairs. Old worlds will bite you, and they will bite you. You can't. There's some tarantulas you can handle. I generally tell people, like, listen, don't buy it to handle it. But if you get comfortable handling it, that's a bonus. It's not like a dog or a cat where it's like you buy it and it's handleable. They might never calm down to that point. Yeah. Whereas a jumping spider, you can generally handle them, especially if it's captive bred, for short periods of time without them being bothered. But definitely, the market of who wants jumping spiders is different than the tarantula market. It really is videos that have shown up on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, of people filming jumping spiders, and it's people who want something cute, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Especially if you're trying to source from a breeder or captive bred, or farm bred. I get some greenhouse grown ones. I get some captive bred. I get some wild caught ones. Um,
Do you breed any yourself?
yeah, I breed Regius. I have babies. Right? Do you want to see the babies?
Sure. How tiny are they?
I'll show you an adult. So
Is the Regius the native one?
Regius is not native. So we have the species that's native here looks very similar to Regius, and the range overlaps. We have Phidippus audax. Phidippus audax is in Ontario. Okay. We also have other ones, Purpuratus. There's 6, 7 species of Phidippus, but the ones that you're going to see in urban areas that are large are audax, and they look very similar to some locales of Regius. Regius, I think the furthest north they range is like Georgia, maybe South Carolina, but they're primarily in Florida. And then there's also different species that might be Regius. They're currently described as Regius in the Bahamas, Jamaica, Cuba, stuff like that. Okay. But these are not Regius. So this is an adult female Hylas diarrhea. And they're a fairly large jumping spider. My finger as a comparison.
I don't know if you can move it to your left.
Good?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a mom. I think that's the mom, actually. I have it next to it. And then these tiny little guys.
All those black spots?
Yeah. Are second or third instar. And you can see there's a bunch of fruit flies caught in them. I've been feeding them fruit flies. They seem to be doing pretty well. There's not a lot of people breeding these in Canada yet. UK has some breeders. But so far, they seem to be doing well communally, and so far, they seem to be surviving. I've raised a ton of Regius this year, probably 200 Regius this year. And it's not difficult, but it's harder to get a high survival rate for Regius, for me at least. And I keep my room humid. I keep my room warm. I feed them. But I've gotten up to 75% survival rate from when they hatch, but I've gotten as low as 25% survival rate. It really depends. But I've had anywhere from 20 to 100 eggs per clutch. And I've had probably in the last 2 years, 10, 15 clutches. This is my only diarrhea clutch right now. I have one giganteus clutch and one female diarrhea that's gravid, I believe. I still have 2 females and a male that I'm planning on pairing. They're near the end of their life because, like I said, 1 to 3 years is normal. The bigger, more subtropical species tend to be 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
But it
both
really,
males and females?
Males live a little shorter from what I've heard. I've seen pretty similar things in practice. They're pretty new. Your mileage is going to vary depending on a lot of things. How much you feed them, what your temperature is, were they wild caught, were they captive bred, all sorts of stuff. So expect a year, be happy with 3 is what I tell people in general. And once they get past like yay big, they're pretty hardy. It's just that young stage, and it takes a while to raise them up. That's the biggest downside is I have people waiting and even if I feed them daily, they're not always going to eat daily, and then they have to molt 4 times. People usually sell at 4th instar. I've sold at 3rd instar. I've sold at 5th instar. But you don't want to sell them super small, especially if you've been babying them, because you send them to a new house, they could easily die. So I've been pushing everyone towards Oresis spiders. And
what are those?
Oresis spiders.
Okay.
So the ones that I get, Oresis vulcanary orange ring, they're yay big. They look like a jumping spider. They like it bone dry. So that's very important, especially when they're young, is they like it bone dry. They still eat fruit flies. They still eat crickets when they're bigger. They live a decent amount of time. They're very cute. They like room temperature. You can't kill them. ERESUS.
And the second name,
Walcanary. If you start WALCK.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Okay.
Yeah. So those are I've been bringing in a lot of them. There's a guy he's an arachnologist. He breeds them, but he also collects them from Greece. He'll collect hatched egg sacs. These guys are also matrophagus, so they'll have one clutch of babies. The babies will eat the mother. So you see the one with the red butt?
Yeah, this one right here?
That's a male.
Oh, okay.
See the ones with the orange ring?
These ones?
Those are females. And they get a pretty good size. They get, like I said, female will get that big live. I say 7 years. It's more like 4 to 7 years. It really depends on how. Once they mature, they kind of have the time's ticking for jumping spiders and for Oresus and for male tarantulas. Once they mature, reach their final molt, that's when they're like you can raise a male tarantula for 6 years, and then he matures to male, and you get a year or two out of him. Or you could raise him for 2 years, and then he turns to adult male, and he dies in a year. Their lifespan is more. Once they reach maturity, they're not going to live much longer than a season. All their energy goes towards finding a mate, mating, ultimately dying.
Right.
They're really not meant to live a long time. And same with the Oresus males, but the females will live 3-4 years once they mature. I've heard 5 years. I've heard 7 years. There's a bunch of different species. Some of them are communal, but they're one of my top sellers.
Sorry, say that again?
They're one of my top sellers, Oresus.
Oh, okay.
I push a lot of people who want jumping spiders towards them because they're like an easy, longer-lived, bigger jumping spider. They still have that cute face. They still have that body. They'll still look around a little bit. They're less visual and they don't jump, but they really are that like gentle, handleable, personable, cute little spider.
It's not the same species, or maybe it is. There's a species you had with you at one of the expos that you said was, I believe, from the UK, and you called it the giant jumping spider.
UK.
I could be wrong on that, on the UK part, but
no, it's probably Hylas giganteus.
Okay.
Hylas giganteus. I get them farm bred from a breeder who raises them in greenhouses. He captures a whole bunch of them, puts them in a greenhouse, lets them free breed, lets them grow up, and then sells those babies.
Okay.
And he imports them from another country. So he's actually raising them in a country that's not the source country. So all the ones that he has comes from another country, but they're the largest jumping spiders in the world.
Okay.
And a related species, Hylas diardi, is the one I just showed you, the babies. Their females are white with little black eyelashes. They're really, really popular. I thought the giganteus would be popular, but they're kind of leggy. And I think that the people who are into jumping spiders, they're not as desirable because I sold out of the diardi immediately, but the giganteus took 4 months before everyone bought them. They were still an easy sale because it's jumping spiders, but they were not the response that the Regius and the diardi got. The Regius and the diardi are really what the market wants. They want fluffy. They want cute. They want a good size. They don't want too leggy.
They want little desk pets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
yeah, if you don't mind the fact that if you get an adult, it's not going to live very long, or if you get a baby, it's fairly fragile for the first bit. Jumping spiders are fine. They're a great pet. But if you want something that's going to be cute and very hardy, and then also live a while when it's an adult, I really push people towards the Oresus.
When it comes to tarantulas, when they're going into molt and they're not eating, is it something that people should be worried about over a long period of time?
No. The key is, are they hydrated? And the only way you tell that is by keeping their soil moist and giving them a water dish. And not every tarantula is going to drink out of a water dish, but you should still offer it. And then the other thing is their abdomen, so their butt part, is it wider than their thorax, which is their body part where their legs are attached? You want their butt to be wider. If you look from the top, wider than the thorax. When the butt is smaller than the thorax, then I would be worried. And if you have a spider that's active and not eating, you might have a mature male. And there's different ways you can tell that. The easiest way is the front pedipalps will be curled in, and there will be like this hook there. And mature males, they tend not to eat Some will eat for a while, but they tend not to eat, and then it just eventually kind of wither away and die. And that's not you keeping them poorly. That's just what they do in nature. In nature, they run around, try and mate with as many females as possible, and then they die. They're not worried about much else. But no, if your tarantula is not eating but it's healthy, I wouldn't worry.
Yeah.
And there's different ways you can tell if it's in pre-molt. When they're younger, it's easier. They kind of get this glossy look on their butt where it just kind of looks black. And that can be concerning to a new keeper because it's like, is it dying? Is it sick? It's just their skin separating, and it gets like this weird, like deep black, like almost like a black olive look. And that's usually right before they molt. They tend to bulk, especially when they're young. They tend to be a lot fatter before they molt. If they're on their back, leave them on their back. That's how they molt. But ultimately, if they're not skinny, I wouldn't worry. They're not like a human. They're not eating 3 times a day. They're eating in the wild once a month, once every 2 months, in captivity every week. I wouldn't go beyond that. A lot of people feed once a week to once a month. I wouldn't feed more than that. And if it's if the abdomen is much larger than the thorax, it's not necessarily obese, but it's full. It doesn't need food.
I'll do a little fast round here. There's a couple of questions from like people on Instagram and stuff like that. So we'll just do like a little speed round here.
Sure.
Scorpions or tarantulas as pets? What's better in your opinion?
They're the same. It's just what you prefer. Some scorpions can kill you. No tarantula can. But in general, scorpions can't climb glass or run away as quick. So if it's personal preference. I don't think one's worse than the other. Don't get a deadly one.
No, that makes sense. Okay. I guess you sort of already answered this one in the story, like in your story, but reptiles or inverts?
Reptiles or inverts?
Yeah.
I like reptiles, but I don't have time for them.
Okay.
So
makes sense.
Yeah.
And then another question is, do you keep reptiles? But I guess that's also
answered. I've got tortoises. Yeah, I would get desert geckos again because I can just feed them once a week. But tropical geckos, like I liked dwarf geckos, so I liked electric blues. I liked the small phelsuma, and those are. I didn't have a mist king setup, so that maybe was my bad. But spraying daily or every other day, feeding rapashi twice a week, feeding crickets. If you have 2 tanks, sure, but I had 250 tanks, so.
Wow.
Yeah, it built up. I've got pictures somewhere. I could post them up. I used to go to the Downsview Expo all the time. I would split tables with different gecko people. So if you bought a weird gecko 7 years ago, it might have been one of mine.
Yeah.
A lot of the electric blues I know in Canada right now are ones that came from me. And a lot of the Clemeri, I was one of the first people with Clemeri in Canada after years. There was in Canada many years ago, but I got a group together. So a lot of the Clemeri that are around now that aren't recently imported came from me as well.
We'll get to the expo and we'll start talking expo stuff in a second. But what about scorpions glowing under a black light? Why do they do that?
It's I forget which compound it is. It might be phosphorus. I'd have to look it up again. But it's basically there's a certain chemicals fluoresce, a lot of body parts like skin flakes, urine, whatever, fluoresce under black light, and it's usually sulfur or phosphorus fluoresce under black light, and they just have that in their keratin, in their chitin, in their armor. So if you shine it on it, you'll see that their soft part of their body doesn't glow. It's just the keratin, and there's a couple other animals that will glow, but it's mostly color based. So there's some like jumping spiders with different prism on their chilicer and stuff like that will glow, but they're the only invert that I tried it on that regularly glows. So it's nothing evolutionary. I think it's just they happen to use this chemical in their building block, and it happens to glow under black light, but it is very strong.
There's no like actual reason for it or defense mechanism
It's
or
yeah,
anything
it's
like
not.
that.
But interestingly enough, have you ever noticed a lot of tarantulas are blue, bright blue?
Okay, yeah. Now
So
that no, but now that you mention it, yeah.
so tarantulas aren't blue. They don't have blue in their color palette. Like they'll have hairs that are physically red. The blue is there's microstructures in their chitin, and especially males will be more blue than females. They have microstructures in their chitin that when they reflect light, they reflect blue light. And they think the reason for that is, well, it looks cool in the day. They're out at night. They are active at night primarily. They think that that structure makes them harder to see in the dark for a lot of different animals' eyes.
Okay.
So that's why there's a lot of bright. Because why would there be bright blue? They can't see. Tarantulas can't see
Yeah.
very well at all. So that it's not for them to see each other, and it's bright. So why would they want to be showing bright colors? They're not super venomous. They're not super dangerous. They're not like a dart frog where
Yeah.
that color says if you eat me, it's not mimicry. So they think that it helps them blend in because in the dark it's harder for them to see.
That's
Kind of
very cool.
an off topic, but that's
No,
yeah.
that's very very
Tarantulas
cool.
aren't
Yeah.
blue. They don't have blue pigments. They have microstructures that make them look blue.
Do you have any other interesting little invert
Factoids.
facts? Yeah, factoids.
Isopods are crustaceans. That's
Yes.
kind of cool.
Yes.
And they're the only fully terrestrial crustaceans. And the way they have babies is they actually keep water in a pouch, and the babies go through the larval stage in this pouch, and then are born as full adults. So that's how they get past. Because all other crustaceans need a water stage. We talked about Geosasama earlier, where they've transitioned to freshwater. Crayfish have transitioned to freshwater, but ultimately, even the land ones need water again. You have isopods that live in the middle of the Sahara Desert. There's Hemilophistis isopods that live in groups digging down to where it's just moist enough that they can survive. And they do this tail dabbing technique because they have gills. They still have gills. They're crustaceans. So
Right.
you'll see sometimes when you spray them, they do this tail dabbing. And what they're doing is they're getting their gills moist. So they can live in really dry conditions, but they need some moisture at some time to breathe or else they desiccate.
Right.
So that's kind of cool, I guess. I thought that was neat.
That's very cool. That brings up a very interesting question as well. Um, a lot of people are getting into bioactive and wanting to do bioactive setups now, and obviously people are using isopods as cleanup crews.
Yeah.
Which actually this brings up another. Okay, this is a perfect like follow up for another question I had. Okay, so they wanted to use isopods as cleanup crews, but obviously isopods like it's fairly
Moist.
humid and moist and wet.
You know what
and
my number one question at the expo is?
Is there a
Is
cleanup
there an
crew for an
isopod
arid?
for bearded dragons?
Yeah. Okay. That's exactly what my question was gonna be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is, but it'll eat them all, and then you won't have any. Yeah,
The bearded dragon will eat
the
them all.
bearded dragon will eat them.
Right.
But I kept for years. I kept proonosis with my tortoises by just keeping a moist corner.
Okay.
So you can make it work in dry environments, but in general, bone dry with a carnivorous animal, they're just gonna get eaten.
Right.
But a tropical setup where there's lots of places to hide, it's moist everywhere. You can have isopods with crested geckos, leopard geckos,
Yeah.
depending on how you keep the leopard gecko. But truly more dry things like bearded dragons, Aki monitors, stuff like that. There's not really an isopod that works super well for them.
Okay. Are millipedes good cleanup crew? Because people are looking for things other than isopods now. Because it is cool at the end of the day to say I have they like look into it. And
Yeah.
I have a lizard and isopods and cleanup crew and millipedes and like it's a whole system in
It
here.
depends.
Yeah.
It depends. A lot of them are toxic. So a lot of millipedes are poisonous, not venomous. So when they're eaten, they could kill things. I don't know if dart frogs are safe with different millipede species, because I know dart frogs will eat a lot of poisonous things and actually gain that poison for themselves, which could be another thing. You don't want to put millipedes with your terribilis, and then all of a sudden you have terribilis that if you touch them, you could die.
Yeah.
If you're high in tetrodotoxin.
Right.
In general, yeah, but they're not going to do the same job as springtails or isopods. Springtails and isopods the best at a cleanup crew. And millipedes can work in a planted tank for sure if there's no reptiles in it. It can work in a planted tank if there's herbivores. But in general, they're not going to do as good a job. And I wouldn't recommend keeping something small and poisonous with reptiles, where isopods are not poisonous. But with isopods, and I tell people every week this, they are protein hungry, and when you have inverts that molt, they're very soft after. And I've seen videos, I've seen pictures of millipedes, centipedes, tarantulas all get nibbled by isopods. And people ask, well, what about arboreal tarantulas, stuff like that? And I say, if that's a risk you're willing to deal with, then sure. Reptiles seem to be pretty safe. Reptile eggs even seem to be pretty safe.
I think so.
But in general, putting isopods with inverts, you're better off just putting springtails, because inverts are not going to have giant poops.
Yeah.
And they're not going to have little bits of molt everywhere. They're either going to eat their molt or it's going to be a full molt. There's no real reason to have isopods with inverts unless you're willing for some of those inverts to get eaten by the isopods. Like I'll keep isopods with my discoids because I know that they breed often enough and there's enough food in there that they just kind of take care of it. But I wouldn't keep them with my giant centipedes because they could easily get nibbled, and I've seen pictures of them get nibbled. And I also don't keep isopods with my millipedes for that reason. When in doubt, use springtails. If you have anything small and fragile, use springtails. And also when you choose isopods, if you choose dwarf whites or dwarf purples, just be aware that you're not going to get rid of them.
Yeah, that's it.
And there's no reason to in a normal dart frog tank, dwarf gecko tank, anything like that. There's no reason to get rid of them. But if you want to introduce something else in there or anything like that, you're always going to have them. They're going to eat rapashi if it gets on the bottom, or any of the powdered foods. If any of your animals die and you want to keep the skeleton, they will eat them very quick. Anything like that. Dart frogs, they seem totally safe with. People have been keeping dwarf whites and dwarf purples with dart frogs for years and years. They'll eat them, everything. Yeah. But springtails are super safe. I've heard of a very small amount of soft-bodied inverts being bothered by certain springtails. But in general, springtails are very safe, and isopods are safe with reptiles and amphibians. Maybe
something else you recommend?
Like a different isopod species?
Or like as a good cleanup crew, not even an isopod species, just like earthworms, springtails. Yeah, I guess.
Dwarf purples are really good. I've seen people use white worms and grindle worms and stuff like that, which are fish food.
Yeah.
They're just little white worms. They tend to like it colder, and they can be slimy and gross. Yeah. Like they can slime up your tank. I would stay away from small cockroaches. Well, we're in Canada, so it's not legal. But if you're somewhere else around the world, they tend to nibble plants. Isopods do minimal plant nibbling. They're pretty safe. We talked about millipedes. If it's just a planted tank and you like the look of millipedes, sure, go nuts. But for reptiles or amphibians, you run the risk of poison. That being said, I know a lot of amphibians can eat poisonous insects or inverts in general. If I'm being professional, you asked earlier, do I call them bugs? You can call them inverts, which is vertebrate, anything without a spine.
Also, as we were talking, I think you said it at one point, and I was like, that's the word I was looking for.
But I'd say bugs, especially at Expo, like when somebody comes by and they're just looking at the table and they're like, ugh, I'm like, yep, it's bugs. Just a lot of bugs.
Just a lot of bugs.
People, you say bugs and people know what that is. You say inverts and...
everyone's like, what?
Yeah, some people know what it is, some people don't. Same thing.
That could be good marketing for the expo. Say inverts and let them walk up to the table and see what it is, and be like, just bugs.
Yeah, I think in my bio I say invertebrate breeder.
Yeah.
But for a while I called my Facebook Westgate Bugs.
Okay.
I think it's still at Westgate Bugs. But I was just Westgate Exotics because when I had reptiles, I just went, I'm like, how am I gonna? I like geckos. I like this. I like that. I like feeders. How am I gonna cover everything? So I went exotics. And there's some people who are like, don't call them exotic pets, blah, blah, blah. They're like, that makes them seem like not like a normal pet. I'm like, well, they're not a dog or a cat. They are an exotic pet.
Right, exotic
And
pet.
maybe it conjures bad images with like tigers and lions, but I don't sell tigers and lions.
Yeah.
Talk about expo stuff.
Yeah.
Um, not to toot my own horn, but I sell a lot of isopods at the expo.
Awesome.
And a big part of that is how I display them.
Yes.
If you go to
yes.
other isopod things and they're in a foggy little container because it just came in from the cold.
Can't even see
It's
them.
got sphagnum. You can't see anything. It just says a name and a price.
Right.
I just put I take my nicest isopods from home, the biggest, nicest ones, stick them in a open cup in a tray that's all open so people can see them. And then I have the species name there and the price. And then when somebody buys them, I hand them a little container or I give them the bag and I pick any container. And I find that being able to see them more so going on, I don't mind if people steal my idea. I told these other people, I'm like, listen, you want to display them nicer, do it like that. I might even start doing what Tarantula Canada does, where you see in all the pictures on my Instagram, I take these nice high quality pictures. I might just have a board of just a bunch of pictures
And be like, pick which one you want.
and you just point at it and then I'll have it underneath. Because the hardest part at expos with isopods is how do you show them to people? How do people see them?
Right.
And now I've got I don't know if you saw Exo Terra, she has those lights with the magnifying glass.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I want to have one of those next to the isopod so you can like move it around, see them up close. In order for people to want to see something, you have to show interesting stuff. So that's why I'm always pulling out the black light with the scorpions. I'm always pulling out the slow moving like Masticoprocus, even if I'm not selling them at the show, just to show people
what you could get into.
Yeah. People want to see something. They don't want to read a name. And when they see something, then they'll read about it, if that makes sense.
100%.
So just the amount of isopods I've just walked by at the show, because it's just a bunch of names and I skim them quick. I'm like, I've got
everything.
Yeah. But there might be one or two there. And if they had like them displayed nice or a nice picture, I would immediately, same with if Tarantula Canada just had the species list,
you would not know what you're buying.
When it's that busy, you're like, oh, I got to see the next booth. Like I have limited time. But they have all the pictures and I'm like, oh, I know I want that right away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So 100%.
So for an expo, talk for anybody who wants to sell stuff at the expo, talk to people, have stuff that's out. You don't have to have them touch it if it's not something that's you're cool with, but like showing people stuff, talking about the interesting things, displaying your animals nicely. A lot of people do that anyway at the expo, but the isopod people, they could definitely show them nicer. And I won't get mad if you copy my thing. Just like I hope Tarantula Canada won't get mad if I copy how they show their pictures with prices. My booth's not expensive. It's not high tech. I want to make it nicer, but just how I display the isopods has definitely made it so I sell more isopods than other booths, because people see it and they're like, I want that one. And
100%.
Yeah.
And I think another thing is
I built that in one day, that display. I knew I needed, I didn't even brainstorm it. It's like, I know I need to show them. I have an expo next week. It was my first expo back. Yeah. I was actually vending with
Hidden Path.
Yeah, Hidden Path. So I was like, I've got to make it interesting to people. So I went to the hardware store, got a hole saw, put some holes in a board, measured them out, put it together overnight. You don't have to spend a ton of money to make it nice and visible. Now there's all these acrylic stands and everything, which are cool too. But I don't think they'd show isopods super well. I don't think they'd be
too much reflection.
Yeah,
I wish vendors would stop. As somebody that's filming the expos, I wish people would stop using like all these reflective acrylics where like you have to like turn the camera in 7 different ways to be able to show the animal.
And you see me like, I don't just you come along with your camera. I'm like, oh,
pull out.
You see, I'm doing it. I'm doing it the whole time.
100%.
And that's I learned that a lot at Reptilia as well. It's like show people stuff, let them see, let them learn, let them hold it if it's safe.
Yes.
And that's how you. I'm not. If I do that to 50 people and not one of them buys something, that's not the point. The point is that other people see that they learn something. I get a lot of people message later, "Hey, what was that thing we held? Do you have any available?" Like it's. Yeah. And even if I don't, it's not to get a sale. It's to show people these things so that they can at least start to get interested in them. Because even when I was into reptiles, I only knew a limited amount about bugs, and it's not always, if you don't know how to research stuff. It's not always super easy to just right away know what's available.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so being able to see stuff is one, and being able to learn about stuff by somebody who can show you. And don't be afraid to, if you go up to a booth, don't be afraid to look at the stuff, ask questions. Most vendors will be happy to answer your questions, even if you think it's a silly question. Yeah.
There are no silly questions. 100%.
There are no silly questions. Yeah,
I'd
rather you ask and not do it than do it and not ask.
Yeah. Agreed. And as a invert seller at a reptile expo, do you feel like it's a little bit tougher for you? Do you feel like
I feel like we do better?
Yeah, really? Okay.
Have you seen Tarantulas Canada's booth every time? Red booth every time. My booth every time.
And your booth every time. It's always full.
I talk to the reptile guys. There's 10 ball python booths. There's 10 leopard gecko booths, crested gecko booths.
Yeah.
The mixed booths do okay.
Yeah.
But it's just like you've got to hope that. But no, and also tarantula keepers have a rack like me. Like I've got 10 racks.
Yes.
Most tarantula keepers have a rack like me. Most reptile keepers don't have what's behind you. They'll have 3 or 4,
1 or 2 or 3 setups. Yeah.
And it's because I'm in here 5 hours, 1 day a week. It used to be 2 days a week. I've gotten it down to 1 day a week, and then I spray 3 times a week.
Okay.
But that's it. Like it's 1 day. It ends
up a lot
being,
of work in 1 day.
It ends up being 6 or 7 hours because I look at everything because I want to see what's going on. But you can have, and I have 300, 400 enclosures. You can have 20 invert enclosures and spend 1 hour a week. Yeah. You can't do that with geckos. They need regular care. And it's not because these guys can handle more abuse. It's because they're just metabolically different than reptiles.
Right.
They're standing still. Most of them would prefer to stand still in a single place. They're a lot smaller, so you don't need as big an enclosure. Like people will keep a ball python in something that size. I don't think that's right, but I don't mind keeping 100 isopods in there because they're all running around. They live under a log in nature. It's
no, it makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah, and for sure the invert people are doing better at the shows.
Yeah.
Not, but there's still, like, the reptile people still do well. There's the reason they come back. But for and also it helps that, like, there's 2 isopod sellers, there's 2 tarantula sellers, and then there's 20 of everything else.
Yeah.
I think the dry stock sellers are where it's really at, and I'm trying to get more dry stock from Europe. I'm trying to get stuff that's commonly used in Europe here, and I'm trying to get some niche stuff from the States here.
For specifically like spiders and
no dry stock.
No, yeah, but dry stock tailored for yeah.
So awesome. Like I don't want to give away what I'm bringing in.
Okay, no, that's fine. Yeah.
But different enclosures. It's hard to bring soil in. You need different licenses. Dry food, it's easy to drive it across, so I might just do that. Shipping it can sometimes be a hassle. But yeah, I want to bring in branded isopod food, branded isopod stuff. I'm making my own flake soil, but it takes a while to make. And if you don't know what flake soil is, it's fermented wood. It's really good for millipedes. It's really good for isopods. And I think those albino narcissus I showed you, I think they're going to be the next big thing. I've had people ask after the show. People always ask me what I feed them.
Yes,
I've seen a lot of people lately on Instagram feeding fava beans, or they've got another name, the large green beans. I think fava bean is a common name for them.
Okay.
But I feed sweet potato.
Okay.
And the reason I feed sweet potato, people talk about the cyanide content, whatever. When I was at Reptilia, we didn't feed carrots because they had the beta carotene levels, as well as the type of beta carotene is not that good for reptiles. So I don't know if that's true or not for inverts, but I also find sweet potato, the sugar content is higher. It sits longer. The starch level is higher, which can be bad for some things, but for inverts, simple starches are fine. And it's really easy to cut. It lasts a long time. It's just everything about it is better than carrots. Pumpkin is the best, but it goes moldy really, really quick.
What do you feed your roaches?
I feed them sweet potato as well. I feed them dog food. I feed them pelletized pig food because I have a potbelly pig.
What?
Yeah, I have a potbelly pig. I have Sphinx cats as well.
I would love to see pictures of Potbelly Pig afterwards.
Yeah. They're at my girlfriend's parents' house right now as we're building a property. We
Okay,
had them
cool.
on a large property. We had to move. They have a big property, so she's up there for now.
That's very cool.
We might end up keeping her around here again. We just have to work out the logistics because she's being a menace at the farm, apparently. So, as they are. I don't recommend, if anyone wants a potbelly pig, I don't recommend one.
Okay.
If you work from home and already live on a farm, sure. Or if you have an area where they can live outdoors that's heated, sure. But they really are. They're cute, but they're destructive, and there's a reason you see little ones and not big ones. And so I don't recommend them as a pet.
Yeah,
if you want something exotic, go something smaller.
Yeah.
But there he is.
Right. So these guys. So tell me about these guys.
These are Narcissus americanus, so they're the same species that lives in Ontario. They're albinos. As far as I know, they're the only species of millipede that's albino. And what I mean by that is there's albino map turtles, there's albino red-eared sliders, there's all these albinos. Out of all the millipedes that are being kept in the world, these are the only species that are albino. So we're lucky that because they're native, we can keep them legally.
Okay.
We're lucky that the only species that we're legally able to keep that's native that also does well in captivity is albino. So I brought some in from Oren McGonigal. I worked once again with Zach from Canada Ant Colony, who I think I mentioned he's the one who got the discoids.
And yes, yeah, absolutely.
And there are other people working with the CFIA and submitting paperwork. But I think they're going to be the next big thing.
Have you been able to breed them? Sorry?
Yeah, I've got babies. They're on the smaller side, so I think there's only maybe one or two mature females I think I got 25 or 30 of them originally.
Wow. Okay.
I got to put them in a bigger enclosure to keep it more moist to get more babies. I'm going to go on a side tangent. So the CFIA,
yes,
you can get exemptions, and you don't have to be some big facility to get exemptions. Like I could get exemptions to keep different roach species or whatever. The problem is I can't sell them. I can't distribute them. I can't get them anywhere else. So if you go to like the Science Center or the ROM or even like birthday party things and they have hissing roaches, giant African snails, it's not because they're legal. It's because they have paperwork to keep them. Yeah. They're just not allowed. They're not even allowed to move them to other zoos. Like we at Reptilia wanted different things from another zoo, and it was actually the Science Center. We wanted, I think, giant African snails or something like that, and it's not legal for us to get them from them. We have to get the paperwork and then get them from some other source country, and then the source has to go they have to be certified in different ways. So you can't like there are people right now in Canada who legally keep beetles, legally keep snails, whatever, but they can't sell them. They can't breed them to sell them.
Okay, makes sense.
As a side.
Yeah.
But I think those millipedes are going to be big, and I think in order to keep those millipedes well, you need flake soil, which is basically fermented. It's flour, yeast, and like smoke pellets. You know, like oak pellets you put in a smoker.
Yeah.
You get the ones that are like chemical free. They just use heat to use the lignin in the wood to pelletize them. You expand those out with water, add flour, add yeast, mix it, keep it sealed, and then you can add different things for nutrition.
Does it smell?
No, it smells like
woody.
It smells like when you go into the woods and you lift up moss, like earthy. It's fermented wood, but it doesn't smell like a fermented drink. It smells like rotting logs. And I've never smelled a rotting log that smells bad. It just smells earthy.
Yeah.
So it does. Sometimes before it's ready, it will have a sour smell.
Okay.
That's the carbs getting turned into sugars in the flour, and then getting fermented by the yeast. Because you just use nutritional yeast or table yeast. So there's definitely like a sourness while it's being made, but when you have the end product, I have a little bit here. This is actually from a a friend of mine gave me some. He sold it at the last expo. Ontario Invert Farm.
Invert Farm,
Right?
yeah.
He's really good. He knows his stuff. He likes the weird stuff. I really go for stuff that is popular, but oddball. So like vinegaroons aren't popular, but I want to sell the most popular vinegaroon. Jumping spiders are getting popular, but I sell the most popular jumping spiders.
Yeah.
Him and a couple other guys, when they get the weird stuff, they get the really weird stuff. So they like weird little beetles that might be interesting for this reason, but they're just a brown little beetle.
Yeah.
Which is cool, but I focus on stuff that people really like want as pets. Where he's got a lot of cool stuff, but he does a lot of cool feeders. So he's been making his own flake soil. He's got discoids. He's got American roaches. Whatever. There's 5 or 6.
Yeah, he has the Surinams as well. I think.
And then he does the stick bugs.
Yeah.
Which are really cool.
Mm-hmm.
They need oak leaves, so it's a hazard. But he keeps oak leaves over the winter in freezers and stuff. He does cool stuff. Native moths and butterflies, and so does Hidden Path. Max at Hidden Path does a lot of that kind of stuff too. They're true bug lovers, not commercial bug sellers like I am.
You actually partner your booth, I guess, up with your girlfriend
Terra. Yeah,
Terra. Okay.
Yeah.
So what does Terra do?
Sells minerals, sells fossils. She likes fossils, but minerals are what sell, so we get those as well. She loves them too.
Okay.
It's doing well for her. She's done a couple shows here. She's done 6 or 7 shows total, but she's done 2 reptile shows. I have some fossil bleed over of the inverts onto my table because I like trilobites a lot. They're basically like ancient isopods, and we get ones from Morocco, directly from Morocco, and they're so well preserved that why don't I get one? Yeah, they're really cool. I want to the high end stuff. I think we'd have to do more mineral shows to sell a lot of it, but a lot of the fluorites and the amethyst and stuff like that does really well at the shows. And then the less expensive fossils, like we'll sell some $100 trilobites, we'll sell some $40 trilobites, but we have $500, $700, $1,000 trilobites. So we're just working on how can we market these to people.
Because, and that booth does well at the show as well.
Yeah, better than me sometimes. But yeah, combined we do great. Like people, the 3D printer guy does great at the show. So we get stuff like this. So Morocco, just it's actual. I don't know if I can get it to focus. I'm not a computer guy. Morocco, just where it is in the world, the kind of sandstone it had was very soft, silty sand. So when these trilobites, which are hard-bodied, died, I'll show you one more here. They, the sand and silt would land on them, and then it would get hard-packed, and minerals, once the body decayed, minerals would replace the cavity. So these are essentially just really, really good plaster casts of what the animals look like. They were just, this one's pretty wild. Like just
that's so cool
for it to come out that good. And they the way they get them out of the rocks, like these are repaired, but that's normal for fossils. They'll break rocks out with a big hammer, and then when they see the parts of a fossil, they'll glue the rock back together, and then they'll chip away at it with like a dental tool, and then they'll sandblast to get all the little details away. And St. Petersburg, Russia is another place that has really good trilobites, but Morocco and St. Petersburg, Russia are the two that just have the craziest fossils. And they're inverts. They're ancient inverts. They're probably crustaceans based on our current thing. So they'd be somewhat... I'll try and show you the eye. Can you make this focus? You'd be better at this.
Coincidentally, as we're speaking about Diatera.
Yes.
Let's see if I can get it to focus.
But yeah, we've been getting more and more fossils, and they do well. And then she's got all sorts of minerals. I feel like
it's hard.
If you sell plants at the show, if you sell minerals. If you sell, there's a lot of things you could sell. Like skulls, like Hidden Path does.
Yeah.
People who like reptiles are gonna like all these kind of life adjacent
oddities. Yes.
Yeah, oddities, life adjacent stuff. Yeah, they're cool.
And then also this guy, you can kind of see what
His mouth plate, which is a
little mouth part,
a rare part to get preserved, which is kind of cool.
That is really cool.
Almost
looks like a stingray from the bottom.
I'll take this guy.
Okay. Yeah, they're cool. They're really cool. I want to get more into them. She's doing her thing. It's going really well. She doesn't have to feed her stock, which is really nice. But yeah, we're gonna. I'm raising up a bunch of astrophytum cactus, which are just little button cacti that are really pretty. So to have more, if she does more shows with minerals, I want to have something that I can go to those shows that's not tarantulas, because tarantulas are good at the reptile show. They're good nowhere else. Her minerals, they're good at hippie type shows. They're good at punk type shows. They're good at all sorts of shows.
Yeah.
She does really well at the reptile shows, mineral shows. So I think cacti would be the same kind of thing. They're just planty enough and lifey enough that they would do well at a reptile show, but they would do well at all kinds of shows.
Yeah, and they're not a hard plant, or like not as one of the hardest plants to keep alive.
No, very easy, very easy. Astrophytum, I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're so variable in their patterns, but they're all just a cactus that gets this big and this tall. They're just like, they're very collectible. They're like isopods, where you have just so many.
I have seen them.
Yeah. And so we've got tons and tons of them growing up right now. We grew a bunch from seed. We've got some adults. So they're one of my side projects that as it gets bigger, I don't know if I'll make a new Instagram for them or what, but I just feel like they're, yeah.
Did you get the seeds off Amazon or eBay?
I got the seeds locally.
Oh, okay.
I know you can get them. So here's the thing. I know you can get them from Asia. I don't know the status of CITES. These are CITES cacti. I don't know the status of CITES seeds. I don't know if you need special paperwork or not. It'll go through probably, but I don't. With this business, I don't want to deal with it. So I'd have to look into it more. But I know that people bring them in all the time and sell them here. So I just bought seeds locally from people who bring them in. But there's nobody who truly just focuses on them in Ontario, as far as I know. If they do, I'd love to find them and get more. But I think that they would do well at the show. And then this upcoming show, there's going to be a plant show.
Yes,
be interesting to see who comes. I know a few people are going. There's going to be a predator, like a carnivorous plant booth, which will be really cool.
I'm very excited for that.
Okay. Yeah. So she does. Max does a show called Ghostwood Market, and she goes to the Ghostwood Market. Alicia Deateri just did a show that she hosted at a greenhouse, friend of Alan Gardens in Toronto.
She hosted it?
Yeah, the carnivorous plant. Her name's Plants a Hut. I should say that. Okay. Tamara, I believe. But she's going to be there. Definitely film her booth because she's got really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So it'll be cool. It'll be cool to see. And I think, like I said, I think fish people could come and do stuff there. I think that certain, maybe better for the pet expo, but I think fish, plants, amphibians, reptiles, inverts.
Yeah. I'd love to see more amphibians.
Skulls, preserved animals, wood working stuff. I think all that stuff can do well in a reptile expo setting.
Yeah.
And should be there. And I think variety is nice. And I like seeing when there's booths that are not just
ball pythons and crested geckos.
Well, yeah. There's a place for them too, but
there's 100%, but not just 10 booths. Yeah, 100%. Okay.
Yeah.
We're getting up to an hour and 46 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask you two more questions and we'll wrap it up.
Sure. First
question is, but you kind of already answered this, but what booths are you most excited to see in this upcoming expo?
I always like seeing whenever Canada ant colony's there. I like seeing the weird products because ants are just they're their own.
Gonna be there?
I don't know. I don't think so. Okay. But whenever they are there, they have their own microcosm of Like
It's a different
invert
part of the
keepers
hobby.
are different than reptile keepers, and ant keepers are different than invert keepers.
Yeah.
It's almost like shrimp keepers. They're their own thing.
They own part of their hobby. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So like they've got all these weird products. I like weird product. I like weird animal products, like weird food, weird supplements, weird lights. Anytime there's any stuff like that, I don't know why I like that stuff, but I think it's cool. I always like seeing Ontario Invert Farm whenever they always have something weird, like one or two things weird. I like seeing Max's booth. I don't like wet specimens, but I like seeing them.
I like them.
yeah. So it's always cool to see their stuff because he does all his stuff himself. Like him and Aaron, Max and Aaron, they preserve it all themselves. They pin it all themselves. So it's cool that they do it themselves. Tamara with Plants a Hut, the carnivorous plants. That'll be cool.
Plants a Hut, is that what you called it?
Plants a Hut, yeah. I can send you a link on Instagram.
I'm like, yeah, please do. I'm like taking notes down. You said like, I'm like, okay, so these are the booths I'm filming this time. Okay, yeah.
The book guys, always need to see what books he's got.
Yeah, Scotty Allen, I think.
Allen. I like seeing Desk Pet Store because she always has the cool isopods. If there's one person in Canada who has the cool isopods that I still want, she's always got something that I don't have. And we trade back and forth all the time. She's getting some isopods from me this show. Okay. But she brings in all sorts of cool isopods, and that's my number one love. Like a lot of these inverts, I import to sell. Some of them I breed, but the isopods I only import for my own collection. Like I might have 10 tarantulas in stock at any time. I have 75-ish isopod species. Like wow. They're my favorite invert to work with.
Okay. Yeah.
If I could keep beetles, it would be beetles.
So final question for you. And if you don't want to give any of this away, that's fine. But is there anything really cool that we should be expecting to see at the Westgate Exotic booths at this upcoming expo?
I'm out of everything. I can't import unless it's warm. I don't have any cool stuff. So if you see this and you want to get any of the stuff I'm talking about, I will not have it. I'm out of velvet spiders. I'm out of vinegaroons. I'm out of whip scorpions. I can't bring centipedes to that show anyway. It's just the rules. I'm out of all 4 jumping spider species I offered. I'm out of.
Shall we fix the question then?
Yeah.
When can we expect more things?
Check my Instagram. I will be posting as stuff comes in April
Awesome.
and May.
Awesome.
I will bring stuff in. I'm trying to talk to. I want to bring dry stock in. I don't know if I'll have it ready for this show. If I do, it won't be anything too exciting yet. But I want to bring in, like I said, common stuff European invert keepers use that isn't found here, and then I want to bring in niche stuff in America, like niche foods for isopods, springtail clay, stuff like that.
Okay.
That you can't really find in the Canadian market. Maybe flake soil. I might just have to make it myself. It's just a time sink.
Yeah. Please do bring in springtail calcium or springtail soil or whatever.
Yeah. The clay.
Yeah.
Clay, yeah. It's good. And I think you can raise the red springtails and stuff on it.
Okay.
I might bring some stuff to show, just because I won't have a ton for sale. But
you'll have isopods.
I'll have some. I'm sold out a lot of them too.
Oh, wow. Okay. So good year then.
It's a good. Yeah. This has been my first real year treating it like a job and not just like a side hobby, because before, when I did reptiles, I would just breed, but when you import, you have to take it somewhat seriously. So this is the first year I've imported for sale.
Yeah.
And I've taken it seriously. I've made sure everything's good. I've done my best at responding to everyone and GG and Instagram and Facebook and email and my phone. Absolutely. At least every week. I try to do every day. But it's been a good first real year. Awesome. And next year I know what sells really well, and I know what I can bring in a lot of, and it'll do well in my room. Right. So I'd love to just bring tons of centipedes, but they don't sell super well.
Yeah.
So now I know, like, listen, I need 350 jumping spiders because that's
the only thing that sells.
But I also want to keep all the other stuff, like, just because, like, I could just do jumping spiders and do better. Yeah. But I want to bring in whip scorpions. I want to bring in vinegaroons. I want to bring in. I'm
Yeah.
gonna try and do emperors again. I can at
Yes.
least do pandas, viatoris,
Yeah.
because at least they're a little more interesting. I've got a few things that are new that I want to try and bring in. Diving bell spiders. Have you ever seen those?
No, what are those?
Jump spiders that live underwater in a bubble. Diving bell spiders. I might have a link on diving bell spiders. I have Dinopus right now.
That's so cool.
Which are net casting spiders. So
What are they called?
What?
What are the net casting spiders called?
DEINOPIS. Look at their eyes. Their eyes are crazy. So here's a cool fact about these guys.
Whoa.
They don't make a web. This is gonna scare people. Give people a scare warning if you pull up the picture of these guys.
Okay.
A lot of people get freaked out when I show them.
Disclaimer: I'm about to put a picture of. Okay, go.
So these guys, yeah. So these guys don't make a web that they live in. They make a web that they hold with their front legs, and they carry it like a net, and they face down towards the ground. And as a cricket or whatever else runs by, they grab it with their web. So if you go to images there, you probably see a picture of them holding their web. Yeah, like that picture right there. See that? So they hold that web and they throw it down, and it even stretches like a net, and then they grab it. And that's how big they get. They get a good size. So I got a few of these from I have a couple suppliers that have them, but I got mine from, shout out to Mini Beast Canada. They just did their first show last expo.
Yeah,
he's a nice guy. He vended with me one expo as his first vending, and now he's importing more stuff. But he's been into bugs longer than I have, and carnivorous plants, all sorts of stuff. Mini Beast Canada, he does some good stuff.
I'm looking forward to
breeds a lot of stuff. Imports some stuff. But anyway, I got them from him. I have other suppliers. I'm hopefully getting a little bigger one so that I can actually sell them because they're delicate and small. So you were asking about cool invert facts. See those big front-facing eyes?
Yes. Oh,
their retinas are so advanced that they can see like in complete darkness. But because they're so advanced and like so intense, every morning when the sun comes up, they get destroyed by the sun and they get blinded, and they repair their own retinas every night to hunt.
Wow.
So their retinas get destroyed and refreshed every day for them to be able to have those binocular vision. Like spiders normally have 8 little eyes that don't see very well, but you see those 2 giant eyes, and they just hover like an inch above the ground or an inch above a leaf, and they just wait for bugs to go by. And so mine have been doing good. They're teeny tiny, I'd show you, but they're just like little specks.
What happens in captivity when there's no light to destroy the eyes every morning?
Well, I keep my room lit 12 hours a day.
And is that enough to destroy the retina?
Yeah, they're not going to be out in the middle of the sun, right? Like they're going to be mostly like hidden under the brush.
That's crazy.
And I'm sure it only gets partially destroyed, or maybe even just gets digested each day. But yeah, they for them to go blind and then repair it every day is pretty amazing.
That is.
Yeah. I don't know of any other animal that does anything like that.
No, that's very, very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Connor, I could speak to you about this for another 8 hours.
We can do another one sometime. When I bring in an import, maybe we'll do one and I can show the kind of stuff I bring in, because I'm just low on everything right now. I gotta find somebody I trust to ship during winter.
Right.
Because the 2 importing services I use don't ship over winter, and then the people that I've talked to didn't seem confident, especially from abroad.
And that makes sense.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely, whenever you get an next import, let me know and we'll schedule it to be like as you're receiving the import. We'll hop on here and do something. But for real, thank you very much for coming on. Of
course, you got to come tour the room at some point too.
I would love to. Absolutely.
I try and keep it uniform and tidy. But if you're here, you can actually see everything, and I can show everything.
Yeah, no, I'd love to plan a trip up one day, and we'll tour the whole.
Yeah. I know it's a bit of a drive from Ottawa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one of the expos, maybe we can. Oh, well, I guess around the expos wouldn't be great for you guys, but
I'll be asleep about an hour after the expo. I'm asleep.
Asleep, yeah.
I stay up super late getting everything ready.
Mm-hmm.
Alicia has the luxury of packing a few days before because it's none of it's alive. But I have to pack all the so I pack 200 isopod packs the night before. Wake up early, go to the expo, talking to people all day. I get home and I fall asleep.
Done. No, 100%. Awesome. Okay, and on that, can you let everyone know where they can find you?
Instagram is the best place to see what I'm working with. I post pictures there the most often. I just did a photo shoot with a bunch more of my isopods, so I'm going to post a bunch more isopods soon.
Awesome.
Westgate Exotics, at Westgate Exotics. I'm also on Facebook. I post on Kijiji sporadically now, but Instagram is the place to find me, at Westgate Exotics.
Awesome. Westgate Exotics, and all those links will be in the description. I'm Daffy's Reptiles on all social media platforms. Daffy's Roundtable for the podcast. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.